Hey everyone, I'm Jeff St. Pierre, the host of the Adult Education Podcast. First of all, thank you so much for listening and subscribing and being a part of this whole community that we have here. It's summertime, so things have been a little hectic in my household. Because of that, I don't have a brand new episode for you. So I'm going to dig back to one of my earlier episodes. I started this podcast back in 2020, so there are probably a lot of episodes that newer listeners haven't had a chance to hear. This is one of my favorites. It's a conversation with Maria Ahlin. She's a public speaker, an author, and the CEO of Changing Attitudes. As her bio says, she's doing what she can to inspire a conversation about pornography. I first posted this conversation right around the 2020 election, and I've always thought it deserved another chance to be heard. So here we are. Also, really quick before we do this, I'm just reposting the entire episode. So you may hear me reference the name Be More Well podcast. That was the original name of the show, but I changed it over to Adult Education shortly after this conversation, actually. So don't be confused. This is still the Adult Education podcast. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Maria Ahlin.
And so what I really see as one of the, I guess you could call it the main problems here, is that porn actually gets to set the standard for what you and I want to do. Instead of us having that choice and that power to, develop for ourselves and to kind of be curious and, dive into sex as a thing that you can really enjoy. But then you're not even allowed to kind of do that. So instead, porn actually just sweeps in and tells you what you're supposed to be turned on by. And so to me, it's a matter of power.
What's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to episode 28 of Be More Well. I'm Jeff St. Pierre, and this week my guest is Maria Ahlin. Now, if you've listened to the podcast before, welcome back. Thank you for taking some time out of your day. If this is your first time checking out the show, I appreciate you. Be More Well is a wellness-focused podcast that was created after I woke up one morning and thought, man, I just don't feel right and I need to make some changes. But where do I start? There's so much information and books and YouTube speeches with advice. So I wanted to talk to people about their stories and how they find wellness and mindfulness in their lives. On Be More Well, you can expect to hear conversations with doctors, musicians, athletes, authors, and everyday people that are fighting the fight to become the best possible versions of themselves. My hope here is that you'll find some inspiration from my guests. I know I do. Don't forget to subscribe to Be More Well on whatever platform you're listening on right now. That way you'll be notified about the latest episodes, and you can go back through older ones as well. And please feel free to leave a rating and review while you're here. I'd really appreciate that. As I just said, this podcast circles around wellness. So what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about wellness? Usually it's things like mental health, physical health, and fitness, right? Well, that all makes sense, but there are some other pieces to this puzzle that don't get as much press. I came across one while surfing YouTube one day. I had watched a few TED Talks, so I guess YouTube was throwing some new ones at me they thought I would like. One of the titles did catch my eye, though, so I figured I'd give it a shot. What ended up happening was my eyes were open to something that I had never really considered, and it's something that needs to be talked about. That video was a TEDx Talk called Let's Talk Porn by Maria Ahlin. Yeah, we're talking about porn today. Like I said, the topic was something I hadn't really thought about, but the more Maria spoke in her talk, the more I realized there's something bigger going on here. Porn consumption is at an all-time high because it's so readily available to anyone that wants it. A simple Google search can bring you unlimited options, and kids are seeing porn at extremely early ages. We actually talk in the interview about how there was a day when buying your first magazine was almost a rite of passage for young men, right? Now elementary school kids are coming across porn on the internet while they do their homework. And I know some of you listening right now may be thinking, so what? It's just porn. Well, porn usage has been found to have massive impacts on the brain. In fact, it's shown similar effects to some drugs. And it's been linked to things like erectile dysfunction and depression. Not only that, but porn changes the way people feel about sex and their bodies. Maria's work has found that women now are not only expected to do certain things that have become normalized in porn, but they themselves believe that's what they're supposed to like because the women in porn do. It's really a dangerous cycle. So porn is a topic that we need to discuss instead of pretending that it just doesn't exist. And that's why we're doing it today. Joining me is Maria Ahlin. She's a public speaker, author, and educator. And she spent the last few years of her life diving into the subject of porn. That's led her to delivering hundreds of public talks, writing one book, and second is on the way next year that we'll talk about in the interview. So I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. I've been waiting a long time to talk to Maria. I'm so glad that it finally happened. Hey.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. I didn't even have to type in my password that you gave me.
Well, look at that. What an easy day for you.
Yes. So how are you?
Doing great. Yeah. I mean, it's getting to be close to winter now, so the weather is starting to shift for us. How are things you're still in Sweden?
Yes,
Okay.
still in Sweden. Actually, I mean, it's today. It's like so just gray,
Mm.
and but I mean, it's been like the most beautiful summer, and yeah. So I mean, and the leaves are kind of still here, but they're also leaving. So I'm getting ready for a typical Swedish, fall slash winter. Yes.
This is totally off topic of what I want to talk about, but I've been kind of curious because people here in America, especially people further north, as the winter starts to come in, the daylight hours shrink. So you have more darkness than you have light, and people get really depressed about it and they get really
Yeah.
like angry about it. But every
Yeah.
time a ranking comes out, we always see those northern countries in Europe as the happiest countries in the world, but you deal with more darkness than we do. So why is there such a big difference? What are you doing differently that makes it
Oh
so
my
much
God.
easier?
That is so interesting. Well, I guess number one, we're probably used to it.
Mm.
And then also, I don't know the specific, I guess, studies or, when they've kind of looked at that, but I guess like they would probably have measured other stuff as well. So, I mean, the quality of life here is obviously very high,
Mm.
and you always feel very, like for me, I always feel so safe in terms of if I were to be sick or if something were to happen, like I'd never, I mean, you should never say never, but I'd probably never go into homelessness or like,
Mhm.
there's a system here that will actually take care of you. So I guess, I don't know, I guess people feel safe in a way then. And that I guess affects your mood or something. That's just a guess.
I'm sure it's all tied together somehow, but it is
Yeah.
interesting how that always happens.
And actually, I have a lot of friends from one of my best friends. She's half Moroccan. And so her father, well, actually, I'm Norwegian and so is she, and then half Moroccan. And so we grew up together in Norway, and when her father would move from Morocco to Norway, he got super super depressed, and
Oh,
the
wow.
same thing happened basically to all of her family members moving, because they're so used to the light, and then once they get here, it's just darkness.
Yeah.
So, but we're just used to darkness, so I don't know.
That's it. That's the moral of the story. You're just used to it.
Yeah.
So, that's what I always say. I'm like, just deal with it. It happens every year. Why is that such a big
Right.
deal?
You're right. Exactly.
Well, Maria, it is so good to finally catch up with you. I know we've had to postpone a couple of times, so I appreciate you making some time to talk to me about
Yeah.
this, because I came across this fascinating YouTube video, a TEDx talk that you gave, and it struck a lot of different chords in my head, because I think when people talk about the idea of, say, wellness and health, they talk about physical health or your diet and all, but no one ever talks about porn. And at first I was like, well, why would they? But then I watched your TED Talk and I was like, but this is a serious thing that has many implications on a person's brain, body, everything. And I was like, why aren't people talking more about this?
Right. I agree. That's what I keep asking myself as well. I'm like, why is there such a silence here?
Hmm.
When number one, people are consuming so much porn, and number two, it has such effects, just as you're saying, in terms of, health effects. And so then, that doesn't, it doesn't add up to me, the silence.
How did you find yourself, before we dive into some of this stuff, how did you find yourself sort of on this crusade?
Right. Like honestly, I'm not really sure to kind of like say when the actual kind of, I guess, like my story with this issue, when that really started. There's like bits and pieces here and there, but I guess it started when I moved from Norway to Sweden. And when I then attended my final year in high school, you could say the translation would be, and then doing my final year project, I decided to focus on basically like the sex industry and that kind of led into the issue of porn in a way. But then that also kind of, I guess, like it took a few years even for me, because I was like, okay, this issue, okay, sure, but I don't know, it was still, I didn't get it, to be honest. I did not get it. And so a couple of years later, I was doing a talk and I was actually asked to speak about porn. And that was the first time ever that I was asked to speak about that. And so I was in my room preparing for the talk. And I was just thinking to myself, okay, if I'm gonna if I'm going to talk about this, I need to kind of know what's available out there. And so I Googled porn. That was kind of like my first time. I was just, I don't know, 20 something Googling it. And then just to kind of see what is the first thing that's going to pop up. So, if you're 12-year-old and you're Googling porn, like, what are you going to see?
Sure.
I'm not going to go into like total detail here, but it was quite, aggressive, to be honest. Yeah. It was, one of the movies was one girl and I guess like 5 or 6 guys, and they were just slapping her around, choking her, pulling her hair, spitting, biting, like all of that stuff. And that was the first film that I ever, like, type in porn, first site, first video. That was the first result. And then when I did the talk, the people arranging it actually told me, we don't think so many people are going to come, going to show up actually. So prepare yourself, because this is we're not really sure about this topic.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be one of their, I guess, like, we had to bring in extra chairs, like kids were sitting on the floor. There was just so many young people interested. And then afterwards, there was this line of people who wanted to speak and who wanted to kind of like share their stories. And this one guy, he basically shared his whole story with addiction. So that really stuck with me. So I guess it's like, these special moments, I guess, looking back, that has kind of led to me being on fire for this issue.
And there's so many different layers to it. I mean, the word porn can encompass it's the workers, it's the videos, it's what goes on, it's addiction too. And that's another one that I think when people hear from someone that they have a sex addiction or they have a porn addiction, everyone's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, okay, you like something that makes you feel good, whatever. But it's a legitimate thing. I mean, it's a real thing that I think gets shrugged off by a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of like what I'm getting as well, in terms of, because whenever I post something on, say, Instagram about addiction, like, the DMs will be just, these long stories, message after message, with especially guys then writing and sharing about just like the hurt that is just so prevalent in all these messages. And not only the hurt, but I think a lot of people are in a place of secrecy and silence, in terms of they've never shared this with anyone. Like, I get that all the time. Like, this is the first time I'm sharing this, and I don't even know you, but like, you're the first person that I ever heard talking about this, and now I just have to, So what I really see is just like the lack of conversation, because I think when you don't talk about it, obviously it's not even normalized then to talk about addiction, of course, because, like, who has a problem with something that doesn't even exist,
Right.
So I think just, creating awareness and just like having the conversation really, I hope, will be able to help a lot of people with their addiction.
It's interesting too, because I feel like, well, there's always been a stigma about it, but the stigma has changed as it's become more available. Like, when I was a teenage boy in the late 90s, I mean, it was a rite of passage to get your first magazine, or you were waiting. Right. The internet was still dial-up phone lines, so you had to wait for the image to come. It was what you did when you were 14 years old. You got, but now, like you said, you can just Google something and it's so easily accessible to everyone. And I feel like the stigma has changed, where people are way more embarrassed to talk about it now than maybe they were before.
Interesting. I see both sides there. I see, on one side, I totally see that, like what you're saying, in terms of the secrecy. And I think that is that is a parallel to the amount of porn that is, just as you're saying, accessible to all of us. So then, because that is going to have consequences in terms of addiction or other, health consequences. So yes, for sure. But I also do see a lot of conversation happening as well, which is so encouraging. And I really think there's just this need for conversation. That's what I'm getting when I'm getting all these messages. I'm just like, oh my God, there are so many people out there who are just dying to talk about this. And that's where they're reaching out for, to this random person who just mentioned it, for 15 minutes in a TED Talk. You know what I mean? So it's just, there is just this huge, need and gap, I guess.
It is funny too, because when I watched your TED Talk, you know how YouTube and Google work. When you watch one video about something, they start giving you videos they think you're going to like. And a lot more TEDx Talks from other places came up of people talking about their addiction or about the mental effects or whatever. And I was like, there is so much out here. And it just seems like this hidden thing that people aren't talking about, but there really is so much. So I love the fact that there are people like trying to spread the word and talk more about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not the first person. So that is like, I'm totally honoring the people who have gone before me and who have spoken about this. There are so many, especially like looking back at, the women's movement, and like there's so many women and in research and writing in books and all of it who has really talked about porn way before the internet, so even back then they would be able to kind of give an analysis of the possible harms and health effects. So yes, I'm applauding everyone who's kind of gone before me. Yeah.
You do a lot of work with younger people too, with teenagers and high school students. And I think it's so important, especially now because of the accessibility, because there was a time where you could get a magazine, you'd read the whole magazine and be done with it, right? But now you could get lost on the internet for days and days and days and never see the same thing twice. How is that impacting the minds of young kids now?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good question. I mean, obviously it's shaping their minds, it's shaping their brains, and it's kind of altering their in terms of like what actually turns them on. So it's kind of changing what your brain finds exciting, especially like in terms of sexual content. It's really rewiring your brain. And the younger you are, obviously, the higher the risk of actually developing a addiction, or at least like a state where you're kind of it's forced in a way, like you feel that you have kind of lost control. That combined with so many adults not even talking about porn with kids and youth, I think that gap is that's what we're kind of seeing the consequences of now, and we will see it. I mean, I would argue there's really a social experiment going on right now in terms of just leaving all of this open to kids and youth and not even talking about, what they're actually seeing. And I think, in terms of like porn specifically, that is created by adults, yet kids are accessing it. And once they're accessing it, the adults are kind of like, just, I'm out of here, you deal with it. And so that, I think it's unfair to the younger generations.
I think there's a mental impression too that porn is used primarily by men. So, and I know that's not necessarily true, but let's play with that for just a second. Sure. If men are the ones that are, watching porn and using porn, how does that impact women and the way they react to men? I mean, I'm sure that has a give and take there, where women now feel pressure to do certain things or be a certain way because of what the men are expecting based on what they see.
Yes, for sure. The foundation of that is actually, if you're getting what I'm saying, it's kind of beautiful in a way that you actually have people who just want to do what is right. You know what I mean? So as a woman in today's society, you're just like, okay, I'm just trying to please this person. I'm just trying to be my best self. Sure. And what porn then does, and porn culture, it actually kind of manipulates this actually foundational, beautiful thing, really. And just kind of takes that, and then you're left with young girls thinking that if I want to be performing the way I should perform, in bed or in the kitchen, then I have to do certain things that maybe I'm not actually even comfortable with, but I have to not only perform certain things, but I also have to ask for certain things. So that's what I'm getting a lot as well. And even guys telling me that, but Maria, you have to get this, that it's not only we as men or as guys who are kind of choking our girls. The girls are asking us to choke them.
Right.
So that's kind of, that's another circle, I guess, which is complicated and complex. And to me, it's all about like power and like just having a positive outlook on sexuality and on sex. And so what I really see as one of the, I guess you could call it, the main problems here is that porn and, the porn industry actually gets to set the standard for what you and I want to do to ourselves or to another person. So instead of us having that choice and that power to kind of, develop for ourselves and to kind of, be curious and, just kind of dive into sex as a fun and, as a thing that you can really just enjoy. But then you're not even allowed to kind of do that. Like, so instead porn actually just sweeps in and tells you what you're supposed to be turned on by. And so to me, it's a matter of power.
Yeah, especially if it's sweeping in when you are younger, because it sets that standard so at such a young age. And, so if then, say you're a young man and you have this impression and you're not finding what you're looking for from the women that you're meeting, now that has physical effects on you too, because now you're like, well, this isn't really doing what I thought it was going to do. You know what I mean? It's weird how the whole cycle works.
Yes, for sure. And just, with the whole stereotype porn that is today's mainstream porn, they have the guys who are just so, well hung, they're huge, they can perform forever, they never get tired. And then you have the girls who just, they can take everything and nothing hurts. And if it hurts, she actually likes it. And, it's just so stereotyped in many ways. And it creates expectations and it really, it shapes today's sexuality in a way that I'm not really sure if kids and youth actually even enjoy it. It's you kind of forget about yourself and your partner, and porn is really the focus, or porn culture and the expectations coming from that.
I think expectations is such a good word to use. Like, I think there are just so many different levels of expectations now because of what has become so readily available for people to see and to experience. And that's so crazy. Like, you're not just living your life and having those awkward moments, whatever. Like, there's an expectation that I'm going to show up and this is going to happen. And it's wild.
Right. And you're also expected to be the best at it right from the start. But I mean, if I were to, because I don't have a driver's license, I have to be honest, I should do it, but I've not done it. I've done other more important stuff.
Yes, you have.
Yes, I have. That's at least what I'm telling myself. But like, if I were to do the driver's license, I would be totally fine with being super, super bad at driving in the beginning, Like, nobody would expect me to know everything. They'd rather expect me to suck, basically, But when it comes to sex, you have to be this, porn star right from the beginning, So to kind of not be able to explore and to just, there's no room for, improvement or exploration. So again, that is, I think, a matter of power, and it's a matter of, I would say, even sexual rights, because young people have that right to explore for themselves instead of porn deciding for them.
What's also interesting about the accessibility aspect is how some of the companies, there's larger companies like, say, Pornhub is a massive company, but they've gotten press, they get media attention, which is weird because, outside of Playboy or something before, you would never see the media talking about pornography the way that, Pornhub was actually talking about sponsoring a stadium, like one of our football stadiums. It was I forget which team it was going to be, but it was going to be the Pornhub stadium for whatever football team it was. And I'm like, can you imagine? Like going to a football game and walking into Pornhub Stadium. I just can't even imagine. But that's where the world has shifted to this point where you've got a company that's worth so much money. They're willing to invest in that, and people are willing to take the money.
Yes, exactly. And it really is all about the money. Yeah, you're totally right. And I think what you're mentioning now really that is porn culture. That is the porn industry becoming mainstream, and then kind of not only operating parallel to pop culture, but really influencing pop culture, and really, the spillover effect in terms of influencing movies and the fitness industry and music and, whatever business. So I'm not surprised. I have to be honest, I'm not surprised, but I do see, in terms of, look at Pornhub's Pornhub Awards. Look at the artists that they've had, as performers, and the collabs they've done with other, famous people. And so they know what they're doing. I have to give them that. Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, they know what they're doing, right?
Oh, yeah. And I really think it's just so interesting to see just how eager they are to be mainstream. because I do really think that they actually realize the power of becoming mainstream. Because, I mean, there was this guy called Max Hardcore, many years back, and he was kind of famous for doing very hardcore porn. But that was still considered, the outcast porn. That was mainstream. That was he was shady. And so that was it. But now he's basically softcore, Max softcore today. Because, and I think there was a quote from a porn producer saying that, basically what we've kind of got left to do to women today is kill them, that's because we've done it all. So today's mainstream porn really is aggressive, verbally aggressive, physically aggressive. There's an old study that looked at, that was a US study, and it looked at basically only rental movies and paid for movies. So it picked out 50 of the most popular movies and kind of looked at the scenes and found that most of them contained physical or verbal aggression. And that was years ago. So imagine today.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And you make a really good point.
Right.
As things have progressed, you have to keep trying to find, with any business, you got to find the next thing. What's going to be next? People are going to get bored if they keep seeing the same thing over and over again. So how do you push it? And it's kind of frightening to hear you talk about that. What is the next step going to be,
Right. I was actually listening to because Pornhub has a podcast as well. So I'm usually listening to that as well. And so I was listening to one this morning with the host of that podcast, and basically she is saying that incest isn't so bad. So you have to also, I think, look at the people who are running Pornhub, the spokesperson, and to kind of look at their attitudes towards women or whatever it is, even men. And I really think if I were a guy, I'd be pissed off at Pornhub. Because is this kind of the way you're viewing me as a guy? You think that the only thing I want to do is to slap someone around? You know what I mean? So it's really,
right.
I'd be critical to Pornhub if I were the target, which most guys are today.
I'm a part of me is glad that I don't know more about them, and part of me is mad that I don't know more about them. I feel like I want to know more so I can understand it, but I also am I don't really want to know more. And that's probably, bad to be apathetic in that way, from my standpoint, but it is, I don't know. It's one of those things. I feel like if I dive deep, what you're doing, I'm just going to get really depressed about it.
Right. And there are times as well when I'm oh my God, where is this even gonna end?
It's gonna be heavy for you, yeah.
Yes, for sure. And what is interesting that I've never felt that heaviness before. When I was younger, I never felt it, but I would constantly be asked about it. Do you ever feel like it's hopeless or something? And I would be, no, what are you even talking about? Of course it's not hopeless. But I of course, I still feel that we can do this. Bigger things have been done in history. But there is a part of me that is kind of feeling the weight of it in a different way today than I was feeling when I was 17 or 18, starting doing this work. And actually there was this moment, and that was probably my first time. It was right after the TEDx Talk had been dropped, and my Instagram would just blow up with DMs. And I was in my kitchen alone, and I was basically just scrolling to these messages from all over the world, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, India, the US, Australia, Sweden, whatever. And I was just whoa, this topic and this issue is so huge. So I was really for 15 minutes, I was just oh my God, this is never gonna work. But then I picked myself up and I'm back to being hopeful again.
And I appreciate that you did. I actually almost DM'd you after watching it. I was like, there's no way she's going to read all these. That's why I went a little bit further and found Changing Attitudes and looked you up in
that was smart.
In different ways. So I'm I think this might be the better way to go. So I'm glad that it all worked out to get there. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about your book too, because now I know you're working on a second book, but your first book is not printed in English, so I have not been able to read it. Tell me a little bit about what the book is all about and the work that you did in that.
So the first book, the English title, if we'd ever translate it, would be Visual Drug. And the subtitle would be On Kids, Youth, and Porn. And so what we actually did, we basically performed a lot of interviews with young people, especially, but also, experts, researchers, police officers, teachers, psychologists, you name it. And basically to my knowledge, it's the first book ever written in Sweden about this issue in terms of how it's actually affecting young people's health. And that was really the focus, how it's affecting young people's health in terms of sexuality, attitudes, relationships. And then we also included a lot about addiction and whether or not we can actually call it an addiction or not. And just kind of this, the discussion around that, which is why we chose to call it visual drug, because that was what people were telling us, that this is a drug. Like, it feels like I could, this might as well have been cocaine for me, like I feel so consumed by this visual drug. So, yes.
There's, I don't know if you saw the documentary on Netflix. It's about social media. And I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but in it, they're talking about the dangers of social media, and somebody uses a quote. They say there's only two industries in the world that talk about their patrons as users, and it's the drug industry and the social media world. You're a Facebook user, you're an Instagram, but I think there's three, because I think pornography is the same way. You're a porn user, and it's so when you say visual drug, I mean, that's really what it is. I mean, it operates so many things in your brain that are the same thing that a drug would give you if you were to take that.
Yeah, for sure. And that is so interesting that you mentioned that, because I've kind of, I started saying porn consumption and porn consumers, and I still use that. But I spoke to a guy and he actually told me that it's not just a consumption, it's a usage, just as what you're saying now. And he also said that you're not just you're not just watching porn, because if you'd watch it, you wouldn't want to watch it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, in terms of if you really saw it, so actually what you're doing is that you're using it in terms of, the drug.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that aren't going to sit around and go, man, I really need to watch James Bond today. But they'll say, I really need to watch porn today,
Right, exactly. So I think that the word use is important. Yeah, I agree.
I've noticed through your social media, you've also been doing a lot of work with women that are in the porn industry and trying to help them and get the education out there for them as well. So talk more about your work with that.
Because I really felt like, if I'm going to be up on all these stages and I'm going to talk about this issue, I started to feel like I was lacking the perspective of the industry. And I didn't just want to read about it. I actually wanted to talk to the people in it. And to be humble about it as well, and to really realize I know 5% of this issue, in terms of the industry. So I have a lot to learn from people within the industry. But then, there's all, this matter of, am I always going to get the entire truth? That's always going to be an issue, of course. But still, I was very I felt really open to it. And I was just teach me. So basically what I did is that I started to reach out to a couple of people, and I went to a conference in DC and just started to kind of look into who had connections within the industry. And one thing that I actually really realized quite quickly, and that kind of basically a lot of organizations that I met speaking about porn never, or at least to me, told me they didn't know anyone in the industry. And that really kind of, I think that's part of the problem, you're talking about something, but you actually, you've never talked to anyone who's actually affected by it in that way.
Right.
And so that was actually hard to find people. But then eventually this one guy connected me to another guy. And then all of a sudden I got the very good connection with a former porn producer. And he then not only talked to me, several times, but also connected me to different people within the industry. And it's still going on. I'm still scheduling, interviews and talks and and it's so interesting. I'm learning so much, and there are stuff that I had to change my mind about, and I've done my best to really be open and to really be not judgmental, and not come in with all these ideas about what I'm gonna hear, but instead just be just shut up and listen. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's basically what I've been doing. Yeah.
It's so interesting. How do you feel now? We've been talking about porn and kind of the stereotypical, scape of it, where it's the videos, it's the sex. But how do you feel about the way social media has kind of come into this world too. I was listening to someone in the fitness world talk about how online on social media, you can find some great workouts and great advice for how to get fit. But also the fitness world on social media has kind of become like porn, because you have all these people that are showing off their sexy outfits and trying to get likes. And it's almost like a new arm of porn to me.
Right. That is interesting. And what is then also, I think, interesting is that, because to me, it's never about the specific individual doing something, it's always about, the culture and more like the systemic parts of this. And so when I see that, my immediate reaction is obviously, if you want to do it, I'm not going to judge anyone for anything, basically. But what I do see is that we have this culture and these standards. I identify as a woman or as a girl, and so to me, I know exactly what is kind of expected of me, with the beauty industry. And before this interview, I did my mascara and I put up my hair, and you know what I mean? I'm like, okay, I have to do certain things. Otherwise, you're going to think I look sick or tired.
I'm sorry I didn't do more. I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's the culture. You didn't have to do more. That's exactly the point. So, when I see that, I'm just like, actually what you did is you confirmed to the culture. And so I don't want to be critical of you. I want to be critical of the culture that made you feel like this was your only way to kind of present yourself. But again, if this is how you want to present yourself, go ahead and do it. But it's the same thing with porn. If you want to have a aggressive sex life, like, go ahead. You know what I mean? That is not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is I want you to be able to choose for yourself.
Yeah.
Again, speaking of, power and rights. So it's not really about what you actually do. It's about what you thought you had to do and what you actually wanted to do. So that's kind of my thing.
In all of your interviews with people, specifically with the women in porn, because I feel like there are some names that you may see online or that you may see pop up as I guess more mainstays or more popular names. But then there are people that probably come in and out really easy and really fast. I mean, do you find there's like an average shelf life? I mean, how does that work?
Yes, 3 months.
Wow, 3 months?
Yeah. That seems to be the average. At least that's what, I've never seen a study on it, but that's what people keep telling me over and over again. That is the number I keep hearing. So 3 months seems to be the time that someone would last. And the reasons for it, I think, are different. Partially, it has to do with basically the consumer getting tired and wanting more. And then also, I mean, if you're not kind of able to kind of build your brand and become this very famous person within those, I guess, 3 months, or, if you're not kind of continuing to kind of like book jobs and, then you're out, then you're not interesting. Yeah. So you either have to really just make it with, which most people won't do. And then if you don't, then it's like 3 months seems to be the average time. Yeah.
That's crazy. So what's next for you in your work? What are you moving towards here?
Yeah. So yesterday I sent in my manuscript for my second book. I feel like I actually just laid down on the floor afterwards. I was just like, I just have to take a break here on the floor. Because, that is such a heavy process, to be honest, to write a book. It is, yes, it's so much just feelings and thoughts, and you want to get it right. And yeah. And so I handed in that, and I'm co-writing it with a friend of mine here in Sweden. So I think that's going to be so good, actually. And then that is dropping probably next fall, but we'll see once we're done. And obviously about porn as well.
You didn't shift and start talking about soccer on us? Right,
no. Or, about the mailman or something that my dog gets so upset about. Yeah, no. I'm not going to write about that. So it's going to be porn. And then I think for next year, I want to write more. Actually, it would be, interesting to see what I could do with the TEDx Talk and to perhaps develop that into something. And yeah, we'll see. Everything is shut down now, and I can't be in LA, so I'm stuck in Sweden. Yeah. Yes.
You just keep working. You know what? I'll be honest with you. Things in America have not been going great lately, so I think you're probably better off.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting as well. Oh my God, how are you doing in this situation?
Doing okay. Actually, my wife, we found out we were pregnant just after all of the shutdowns happened. So it's worked out great because she hasn't had to go to work. She's been able to work from home, which has been easier on her body because she's a teacher. So she doesn't have to stand up in front of all the kids all day long. She can kind of sit and relax and do it that way. So timing wise, it's actually worked out pretty well for us in that regard. But it's tough. It's tough not to hang out with people, and we're being really careful now too, because I don't want to get it. Neither one of us wants to get it, but with her being pregnant, we definitely don't want to get it,
sure.
out of concern for that. So we've been really, we haven't seen our parents, our families, like we haven't seen much of anybody. So it's been a little, I don't know, it's been a little tough on that regard, but, we could be doing a lot worse. I'll take it. We're fine in all things considered.
Yeah, I hear you. Wow. But wow, you're going to remember this pregnancy.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not going to forget it.
Maria, when we started talking, I could see some sunshine out of your window. Now it is completely dark. So I know I've had you on here for a while. Just really quick before we wrap up, Changing Attitudes. Where can people go to find out more information about what you're doing with Changing Attitudes?
Yeah, go on Instagram. That's the easiest part. Just go on Changing Attitudes on Instagram or changingattitudes.co online. Yes. And then, that's where we kind of, especially on Instagram, that's where we post a lot of facts. We try to post every day in terms of just sharing really fact-based knowledge when it comes to all these issues. And we also have a studio with a lot of merch and stuff like that, hoodies and, whatever. So, yes. So that's all available online.
You are also online too. So if people want to find out more about you and what you're doing outside of Changing Attitudes, social media, probably the best way to go.
Yes. Ahlin Maria. So that's my last name before Ahlin and Maria. Yes. Yeah.
And it's Ahlin, right?
Yes.
I thought so.
You did that good.
I wanted to make sure. I was like, I'm going to screw this up, so I should probably wait and see if I hear her say it first, and then we'll be good to go.
You're so smart. Because nobody gets it. You were kind of the first one.
Yes. I knew I'd do something good today. Well, Maria, I'm so glad we finally got a chance to connect. It's really been a pleasure. I appreciate the work you're doing so much. It's opened my eyes in so many different ways into things that I never thought about before. Like I told you at the beginning, I never thought I'd be having this conversation, but it makes so much sense. It ties into so many more things than I think anybody really knows. So I appreciate you fighting the good fight out there, and congratulations on the second book and everything. It sounds like things are going really well.
That was so nice of you. Thank you. I'm just glad that, that there's a conversation about to happen. That's kind of what I'm feeling. And so, the requests in terms of podcasts there's been a change there. I really see that. And that, I think, really speaks to the interest in this issue. So that makes me so happy. Yeah.
Well, you're doing some good work. Hopefully the second book will come out in English, and I'll have to get a good translator.
Yeah. Or you can just move to Sweden and learn Swedish. And
I could try that.
Yeah. One day.
One day. It's on the list.